Yeah, that looks good.
Awesome. Looks like we're good to go.
All right, so we're able to start now. I don't want to start too early and then people miss the intro.
Oh, Jill said we're live, so we might still have a lag,
Yep.
don't we? Okay.
Nope, she gave a thumbs up in the chat.
Okay,
Oh,
perfect.
great.
All right, so welcome to the Wichita State Human Factors Psychology Department presentation for Expanding Your Horizons. So how this is going to work today is we're going to all introduce ourselves to you to give you guys a little background about each of us. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some research that we're interested in and how we conduct that research. So as we go through, we'd love for you to ask questions, put comments in the chat, and we can get to it. I was told that there's a little delay, so we'll get to it when we can. But first, what we're going to do is going to talk a little bit about what human factors is, and then I'll give you a chance to meet all the ladies. So first, human factors psychology. What we focus on is in improving productivity, efficiency, safety across human technology systems and communities. So it's basically anything that somebody would interact with. So you can think of so many different things that someone would interact with, from your phone to your car to your fridge. So you'll get some more examples as we go through as well. Next slide. So we all work with Optimize and the Applied Research Laboratory at Wichita State. So we've worked with several different companies, and we have some listed here, like Google, Honeywell, Dell, Coca-Cola, that we've worked with to help improve the usability of these different systems. Next slide. All right, so as we're going through all of these slides and talking and answering your ladies' questions, we'd love for you to play bingo with us. So I have a bingo link there, and if you could copy and paste that into the chat, Jill, it would be very helpful. This link should be non-editable, editable. So please feel free to tag along on your own and see if you can get a blackout bingo by marking all the spots. Let us know if you have any questions on that as well. Okay.
So,
right.
So one of the first things that people tend to kind of think about when it comes to human factors is, what can I even do with human factors? What are the career paths that are my options if I go into human factors? So we have a few general categories listed here. The first one is academic. So if you work in an academic institution or in academia, you're typically working for either a state, a private college, or a university. So here you can kind of think of faculty positions, professors and teachers who could either teach new human factors researchers or who could focus on conducting research that's often helped and even led by graduate students. So anything where you are teaching or furthering the knowledge of human factors really falls into that academia, as long as it's at a college or a university. The next option there is industry, which is where a lot of human factors jobs tend to go towards. So industry is any job where you're working for a company such as Dell, Honeywell, Google, the ones that were mentioned on a previous slide. So here you would be working with product development teams, and you would have the title of human factor engineer, human factor researcher, something of that sort, where you're working with that company to develop their products to improve the usability of different products. So you could be considered an ergonomist, you could be considered a safety scientist, a usability practitioner. There's a lot of different names that HF careers kind of go under in industry. The next ones are somewhat related. So military research centers. These are military research labs that are run by the Army, the Air Force, the Navy. They employ human factors professionals to help design systems that they use in their work. So whether it's a new computer system or dealing with aircrafts, designing of the cockpit, or designing something on a naval ship, that is where that military research center focuses their work. And then the last one we have here is a government agency. So these are agencies like the National Research Council, NASA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and many more that are just government run, doesn't have to be military, but they conduct more research largely in developing safety protocols and design of products as well. So those are just some ideas of career paths where you could take a human factors career. So next.
All right, so now we're going to go ahead and introduce each of the ladies. So I'm first. So my name is Jasmine Granados. I am a fifth-year graduate student here at the Human Factors program. I have done 2 internships. So I first interned at a place called Human Interfaces. It's a consulting company where I've worked with different companies like Dell and HP. And I worked on different products with those companies. I also, this summer, interned at NASA, and I worked on the Orion Displays team. I actually did this internship remotely, so I did it from Kansas, over in Wichita, Kansas, and that was a really fun experience. My research interests are in video games, accessibility, and usability. Some of my favorite games are the Mass Effect series, Animal Crossing, and one fun fact I want to share is that I like to take pictures of bugs. And then just really quickly peeking in the corner, that's my cat Luna. She loves to jump in my hamper when I'm trying to do my laundry. Next person.
Hello everyone, my name is Rachel Sutton. I am a first-year graduate student here at Wichita State University. I'm a part of the Challenge Metacognition and Perception Champ Lab. My research interests include automation and risk as it pertains to driving, and I really enjoy cooking, baking, and playing the piano. Some fun facts about me are that I lived in Kodiak, Alaska, and that I can solve Rubik's Cube.
Hi, I'm Shivani. I'm a second-year grad student. I'm part of the Wichita Auditory Automation Aging Research Group. The A stands for multiple things. And my research interests are automated driving, medical human factors, aging-related research, and usability research. I love going on walks. I love dogs and all animals. And spending time with people, watching Parks and Recreation, baking, and Googling. And the fun fact was just a joke. I'm not 12. A lot of people think I am, but I'm not. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Abbie. I'm a second-year graduate student here, and I work at Envision Research Institute, also downtown in Wichita, where we work with kind of making things better for people who have visual impairments, especially with driving. Some of my research interests are older adults, driving, cognition, a little bit of VR, like I said, vision, usability, and some pickleball. Hobbies that I like to do, which I can't really do here in Kansas, are hiking and camping, and I can kind of bike here. I do some of that. Trying new restaurants here in town, and I really enjoy CrossFit. A fun fact about me is that I actually built my own desk that I'm sitting at during quarantine. It's not the best, but I should have put a picture up, but it's not my best work. I'll do it again sometime, and maybe it'll be better. Now I know.
Hey ladies, my name is Christina. I like to joke and say I'm a lifelong graduate student. I've definitely been here the longest, but I am currently living in Austin. I work at Dell as a senior UX researcher. In the past, I've also interned at Human Interfaces and Honeywell Aerospace, but I also work with WSU for Optimize and General Atomics. And while my research interest is not what I do for my job, I still really enjoy persuasive design, ethics in design, and sustainabilities. And my hobbies are very general, just music, food, feeding people. And you can see here is my dog. His name is Salvador.
All right, and I'm Monica. So I'm a third-year graduate student, and I work in the Applied Cognition and Expertise Lab. I'm actually currently on internship, so I'm not in Wichita right now. I'm on internship with Harley-Davidson Motor Company right now, working as their Human Factors Engineering intern. Some of my research interests include cognitive expertise and decision-making, specifically as it applies to Formula One motorsports and racing. Some personal favorites and interests of mine, I think we all love food here, so there's that. I really like to read. I love spending times with my dogs. You can see them there. I'm really into Harry Potter and Lego, Formula One video games, and I make a lot of really bad jokes, so there's that. And a fun fact about me is I got married last month, and he's kind of a dork, but it's okay. You can kind of see his head poking from the side of my picture over there.
All right, so now that you got to get to know us a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit more about our research interests and kind of give you more of an idea of what human factors research is. So I get to go first. So I love video games, and I'm extremely passionate about making them accessible. Video games should be fun for everyone. And that's where the idea of universal design really comes into play. Universal design really, it's the idea that it allows most people to use or experience that thing without adaptation, no matter their age or abilities. So people who are deaf or blind or have a motor impairment, they just want to live their life in a way that's similar to everyone else. And universal design really tackles that. A really good example of universal design are building ramps. So you've probably experienced a building ramp before in your life. They were originally made to allow wheelchair users to gain access to buildings. But that's not the only people that they benefit. People who have a temporary injury, and they are using crutches, benefit from ramps, as well as individuals who are using walkers, and even toddlers who are not super comfortable with the stairs yet benefit from ramps. So that's the idea of universal design. And I really want to apply this idea to video games. So I want to go ahead and give you an example of a video game and kind of show you how this might be applied. So over there, I have a GIF of Animal Crossing fishing. So in this example, it's using redundant cues. So the cues here are three different things. We have a visual cue. We have that splash that the fish has bitten the hook. We have a sound. Well, we can't hear it right now, but we have a sound of a splashing, letting you know that the fish has bitten the hook. And also we have one more. We have a vibration cue. When the fish bites the hook, we feel that vibration. So there's three different cues that are indicating that the fish has bitten the hook. So that's called a redundant display. And why that's helpful is because people who might not have access to one of those features would have access to one of the other ones. So for example, if I can't hear the splash, I can see the splash and feel it instead. So next slide. Right, so let me tell you more specifically what I've done in my research. So in one of my studies, I interviewed 8 deaf and hard of hearing gamers, and I found a lot of information from those interviews. But one of the things I decided to focus on was this barrier of directional sound. So meaning a lot of games use this idea of directional sound, like footsteps and gunshots. It's important to know which direction those sounds are coming from. So gamers were having a really hard time with that. So I was thinking, how can we tackle this issue? Well, Fortnite has done something already that they've implemented. Hopefully some of you have played Fortnite before. So Fortnite, that's displayed over on the right in that GIF. There, what it's showing you is there's some arches that are appearing on the screen. There's a white arch that appears, and you can kind of see a little footsteps. It might be a little not super smooth, the GIF, but there's a white arch that appears and has a little footstep indicator saying where the direction of the footsteps are coming. And then we also have that orange indicator that's indicating where the gunshots are coming. So even if you're not hearing sound like you are now, you can still visually see where the sounds are coming from. So that's one way that Fortnite tackled this problem. However, when you're in an environment that is highly visual, like for example, Fortnite, maybe providing another visual cue isn't the best way to do that. So what I'm doing for my study is I'm exploring how we might be able to use vibration as a cue for directional information. So if somebody is approaching from the right side or approaching from the left side, maybe we get a vibration from that side, from the accompanying side, to indicate, hey, somebody's over here, or hey, somebody's over here. So that's what I'm exploring in my study. Go ahead and click, and I have a question for you all. So I want you to think about this. Can any of you think of a time when you've played a game without sound or used an accessibility option in a game? And we'll get to your answers later.
So my second year project is related to risk, driving, and automation. I'm going to be looking at two different kinds of risks as it relates to driving. Actual risk, which is the risk that is certain, and perceived risk, which is the risk that is uncertain. So part of the reason why I'm working on this project is because 50% of all car crashes happen at intersections, and 22% of those car crashes happen at yellow lights that are turning red. For my experiment, I plan to measure the participants' actual versus perceived risk as they approach a yellow light, as well as their trust in the automated system, which in this case is the vehicle. As technology becomes more advanced, my hope is that I can help to bridge the gap between automation and artificial intelligence as it relates to cars and vehicles.
So that was Rachel Sutton's slide about automated driving, and she'll be here with us shortly to do Q&A at the end. So now I'm going to talk about how to improve the medical field. So applying human factors to healthcare reduces medical errors and allows clinicians to deliver better care to their patients. And so we can inform medical professionals and engineers about psychological principles, so about how people actually work, so that they can take that into consideration and design things accordingly for doctors and patients. So I'm going to go over a few issues related to this. So the first one would be medical errors. So analyzing medical death rate data over eight years, Johns Hopkins found that more than 250,000 deaths per year are due to medical errors in the States. And so that makes it like the third highest cause of death behind heart disease and cancer. But one good thing is that human factors can help. So for example, some errors are because of how labels on pill bottles are very confusing for both pharmacists and also patients. And so because they have very similar names and effects and all pill bottles look the same, human factors can help highlight certain parts of the label that are important for consumers and pharmacists to notice so that they can distinguish between them easily. And we actually had a student at Wichita State who worked on a project like this a couple years ago. Another issue is burnout. So medical professionals often experience physical and mental fatigue, tiredness, and burnout because of their long shifts and also just the nature of their work. It's very taxing. So this can impact their health negatively and their performance as well. And so that can also translate to how they care for patients. But human factors can help because we can improve technology and design better and easy to use tools and interfaces and even work practices so that we can reduce stress for medical professionals. Another thing we can do is we can improve how medical professionals are trained. So for example, we can help design and implement medical training using VR headsets, and VR headsets are being used in all sorts of training these days, and it's pretty cool because it's super immersive, and so people get a more rounded training experience. So one big issue in the medical field is the high number of alarms that go off in a hospital. So on average, they say that a hospital has 350 alarms going off just for one bed every day. And the situation's even worse in an ICU where 771 alarms go off per bed per day. And there are multiple beds, of course. Adding to the complication of this issue, most of these alarms turn out to be false. And that's because it's important for alarm designers to be overcautious, and because missing a critical event would be a lot worse. But the problem that arises is that it leads to an issue called alarm fatigue, where because of the high number of alarms in general, the user gets desensitized because they're overwhelmed by the number of alarms, and they may not even physically be able to hear it after a point. And so this can cause them to not respond to alarms. It could lead to delays in response, just completely ignoring the alarms, or even sometimes turning off the alarms because they're usually false. And this is also because they're doing other tasks while they respond to alarms. And so this causes burnout among nurses and doctors, but also disturbs the patient and makes it hard for them to rest. My 2-year project is looking at how much of a reduction in the number of false alarms can we make in order to improve performance and reduce stress in a nurse. So I wanted to ask you all about whether you can think of an example of how human factors can help something in the medical field. And we can get to that later towards the end.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about my work that I do with pickleball and older adults. So just generally, older adults have a harder time, using their brain to do maybe simple tasks that we would think are simple, that it just is a little bit more difficult for them with age. And so there's been a lot of research on how maybe exercise can help that and, help their brain function cognitively. So here, cognitively means, them making decisions and thinking and like attention and learning new things and things like that. So all things that have to do with cognition, older adults it declines as they age. And so research has really only been done about exercises like running or walking or swimming or even biking, but there's not a lot of research on maybe how racket sports could help. And racket sports are considered an open skilled exercise. So that includes more like, side to side lateral movements. It's keeping them more engaged competitively and just, mentally like having to predict where the ball is going to go. And so right now I'm in the process of looking at the benefits that pickleball, is the sport that we chose, might have on older adults' cognition. So previously, like tennis and badminton have been studied, and they show somewhat promising results, but there's not enough, there's not enough research that's been done about it. And so there's also been a little bit about pickleball and how, it's still a pretty intense sport, like it still increases their heart rate and stuff and gets them moving. But it is a good option for older adults because of the social interaction. The court is a lot smaller than maybe a tennis court, so they're less running around, even though there's still that side to side movement. And it's a pretty easy sport for anybody to pick up and learn. So in the study that we're doing, we have 83 participants. They range, from 55 to 85 years old, and we have different groups. So we put, different people who, depending on what they play, there's aerobic exercisers. So that's like people who run or, swim or walk or that kind of thing. And then we have advanced pickleball players who played for more than a year. So we're looking at people who play long term, how I think it's on average, people have played for like 3 years or so. And then versus like the novice pickleball players, they've only been playing for a few months. And then we have some non-exercise groups. And so we're slowly finding that older adults are, who play pickleball for more years, longer, they can perform better on brain tasks, is what I like to think about it as. And so exercising in general for many years, and even playing different sports or, running and pickleball is what we're starting to see. Maybe that combination of running and swimming and playing these racket sports can help maintain older adults' brains and their functioning in the long run. So hopefully we, find more results on that, because we're still collecting data right now, but it's looking promising that pickleball, if it's been played for several years, can actually help older adults with their cognition. And so a question I'd like you to think about is that, do you think, are there any other sports that might help older adults with their brain functioning? And we'll get to that at the end. Thank you, Shivani.
Hey ladies. So like I mentioned earlier, my passion is in sustainability and design. So let's talk about it. So about 5 years ago, the United Nations gathered together all of the world leaders to tackle some of the hardest issues that we have to deal with on Earth. And some of these societal issues are things I'm sure you're all heard of: poverty, inequality, and climate change. In order for all the world leaders to align on the same page, they established these 17 goals and then cushioned it into a 15-year plan to try to make some progress. So while not legally binding, the UN does ask all countries to try to take ownership and responsibility to try to implement these achievements by 2030. So we got about 10 years left, guys. Hit the next slide. Okay, so basically, where are we now, 5 years later, in terms of environmental sustainability for climate change? So yes, we certainly have attracted worldwide attention from political leaders to develop these policies and strategic initiatives, but at the federal level and also for entrepreneurial intervention efforts, they have not quite been there for the United States. But luckily for researchers in the field of human-computer interaction, HCI, there has been much greater interest in the last decade. So if you take a second to look down at all your smart devices, you'll know just how tolerant we've become to accepting technology into our everyday lives. So it only makes sense for HCI researchers to attempt to identify and design these sensible solutions through technological intervention. And this field of science goes by many names, but the most popular one is called, dun dun, unsurprisingly, sustainable HCI. Okay. So unfortunately, academic research can only go so far. Some of these studies in the last 10 years did yield some pretty interesting and innovative design interventions, but they really fail to directly raise awareness and actually target sustainable behavioral change in everyday people. They forget to focus on the human part of the human-centered design. So now if you skip forward to the present day, there has been a better and growing number of body of work that emphasizes persuasion as a monumental design element that can utilize some of these psychological principles of influence to target and identify barriers such as abilities, motivation, and also trigger. So what that means is we're trying to call attention to persuasion as a science. Because of the use of technologies, it can influence and also shape users' intentions and also behavior without using coercion or deception. So basically, the idea is to use technologies to influence behavioral change towards more sustainable actions with these design elements. Does that sound scary? No, it shouldn't. Because like doctors and their oath to do no harm, while we can't always guarantee that every product should follow this code, ultimately persuasive technology should only nudge users who are interested in accomplishing behaviors that they want to change themselves. So on the next slide, I am going to show you a couple examples. So basically, these are persuasive tech in the wild. I'm sure you might have seen these before, either on yourself or even on your parents and relatives. So these are persuasive tech that are currently marketed in the real world. The theme that you'll see here is, like I mentioned, motivation, awareness, and also a goal for behavioral change. So you'll see in the very first image is an app to help you save more money. The next one shows how to smoke less in a day. And then the two smart devices just ask you to exercise more or stand up more. The last one there is just a way to use less electricity. So the aim of persuasive technology for sustainability is to motivate people to adopt more of these pro-environmental behaviors. And basically, what we're having a challenge in right now is to get people to engage, and not just any people, apathetic people to engage in these pro-environmental behaviors. And after years of field interventions, the ideal design that you'll see in this graph is to synchronize all these three elements, motivation, ability, and trigger to come all at once. So in order for a behavioral change to happen, the motivation has to be high in a person. It has to be pretty easy to do, and a trigger has to happen at a perfect time. So I'm going to give a really quick example of what I'm currently having an issue with. Oh, go back to slide. Yeah. So basically, one of the main challenges I'm encountering right now is I work at my desk all day, and I really want to try to stand up more. So I bought a smartwatch that tells me when to stand up. So technically I have high motivation, and I also have the ability to stand up because it's pretty easy to do. But my problem is I get distracted by emails and calls all day, and consequently I just never leave my seat. So with this smartwatch, it will act as a trigger because it buzzes on my wrist to remind me when to stand up. And so with high motivation, high ability, and also a good timing of a trigger, the behavior of standing up can occur. And so on the very last slide, I just want to show you that it doesn't always have to be technology like as a sense, because this field of persuasive design can be implemented in everything. So what I'm going to show you here is some example of how you can apply sustainability and pro-environmental behaviors by looking at product design, because like I mentioned, product design is still very much a part of human factors. So the picture on the left is a design of a two-tone flash lever to essentially highlight that green lever on the very bottom to showcase to user to make it easier and also remind us to perform a greener action, and gives us an opportunity to use less water as we're flushing. And then on the right is just an idea for a metaphoric design concept that ultimately helps us and also encourage us to be more mindful of our consumption of the napkins. I won't be able to go into the type of study that the researchers did there, but essentially they compared a normal napkin dispenser, and then they used a metaphoric design of a tree to showcase how much tree is cut down to allocate to napkin to use. And then they also use another control of just a Christmas tree. And what they found is the napkin dispenser with the tree showcasing how much resources that we're using up does encourage users to use less napkins. So at the end of this day, my question is, have you ever come across persuasive tech or design in the wild?
All right, so kind of the last example of research and whatnot that we're going to talk about has to do a little bit more with driving and expertise. So if you've ever been in a car or anything like that, you know that there's a lot of different interfaces that the driver interacts with. So you have this one on the left, which is your infotainment system. This is essentially the radio, your map system, navigation, the thing that's on the center of the dash between the driver and the passenger seat. You have all of the buttons that are on the steering wheel now. Steering wheels these days are extremely complex. Some even have 10 plus buttons on them in addition to the shifter. And then you also have your dashboard. So your speedometer gauge, your RPMs, your gas level, that can be as easy as 2 or 3 dials, or some cars that are higher end, I think Mercedes and a few others now, are even putting video displays there to give you a more interactive view of how you're using your car. So there's a number of different interfaces that you interact with while you're doing a very dangerous task of driving. So driving in and of itself puts a lot of what we call cognitive load on the driver. So it puts a lot of, or it really engages all of their cognitive faculties of thinking, decision-making, remembering where they're going, and also your perception. So paying attention to what's going on around you. These are all the different cognitive factors that a driver has to consider when they're driving. So whenever we design a new driver interface, we have to do what's called driver distraction testing to make sure that whatever interface we're using, whether it's the infotainment system, the new dashboard design, or even the buttons on the steering wheel, we have to make sure that they aren't overly distracting the driver from the very important task of paying attention to what's going on the road. So some people are better at driving than others. And those who are really good at driving are considered experts. So an expert driver is a person who is able to consistently perform better than a novice driver and has a lower stress put on them cognitively while they're going through that driving task. So expert drivers are typically those who are in driving commercials. I'm talking about movie and stunt drivers, but even race car drivers. So if you go to the next slide. So I mentioned in my little about me slide that I'm really interested in Formula One racing. So Formula One racing is really big in Europe. And you can see here on the left, that's an image of a Formula One race car as it's going around the track in Italy. So on this track, they are driving upwards of 200 miles an hour, depending on the track. There are 20 cars on the track at the same time, and they have to take roughly between 10 and 20 turns on each different track. So there's a lot going on in the environment, from the number of cars on the road, how close together they are, how fast they're going, and how many different other people they have to account for when they're making their decisions about if they're going to turn sooner or later, and if they're going to try to pass somebody in front of them. And all at the same time, if you see that picture on the right, this is the steering wheel inside of one of those cars. It has a lot more going on than your everyday vehicle driving interface. So the little screen there gives you some feedback about the status of the car. So that is similar to your dashboard, where you have your gas gauge and your speed gauge. But you also have, on this one specifically, 19 different buttons and dials that you have to use in order to change things about the car to adapt to your situation. So this puts a very high cognitive load on the driver. They have to be able to really pay attention to everything around them and be able to navigate through this steering wheel and what buttons they're using. So if you want to go to the next slide, here's just another steering wheel you can see. But steering wheels typically have 15 or more buttons on them, dials, and they also have the shifter paddles. So there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot of high risks when you're in that kind of environment. There's the risk of course, of accidents. Some people tend to go slower if they're having difficulty navigating that gauge. So there's a joke that goes around. If you've ever seen somebody get lost while they're driving and they turn down the radio so that they can figure out where they're going, they're reducing the cognitive load that the listening to the radio puts on their brain in order to put more effort into finding directions. So considering the fact that we want to reduce cognitive load in order to improve safety in an environment, go ahead and put up the question. My question is, with the amount of cognitive demand, with the number of things that a race car driver has to consider, how could we design or redesign a steering wheel? What sort of usability can we make easier for a driver so that we can improve their performance and maybe reduce the chance that they will have an accident? So again, we can get to your answers and kind of thoughts on this in a second.
All right. So I know that was a lot of information, but hopefully you kind of connected with some of it and were able to apply it in your real life. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open the floor for questions. And if we don't get any questions right away, we can start talking about a few things to hopefully let you think a little bit more. But I want to open it up with a few general questions that might get you start to think about some potential questions you might have. So maybe think about a career that you want to do, and you might not be completely sure yet, but maybe some ideas of some careers that you might want to do. How would HF apply? So how would human factors apply to that area? Can you think of any field where human factors wouldn't apply? Challenge us, try to make us think about it. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and start there and see if we have any questions.
I have one example that I realized my first year when I was in human factors that was very applicable to my life that I didn't realize how applicable it was. So if you've ever tried to build anything like furniture from IKEA or a Lego set or anything like that, a lot of the times you either have instructions that are written word for word, such as take part A and use nail G in order to attach part A to piece H or what have you. IKEA is not the best with its instructions. But that can be very confusing, and it puts a lot more stress on the user, and it involves them using a lot more effort to put together a piece of furniture or what have you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what Lego specifically does to kind of get around that, so if you've ever used Lego bricks or tried to build a set, they use pictures in order to show which piece you should be putting where, instead of describing, take a blue 1x1 square that's 1/2 inch thick and put it on top of the black 2x4 square. That would be ridiculously confusing. So even something as simple as using pictures in your instructions instead of trying to write something out is absolutely human factors and usability.
Yeah, I mean, another example I can think of that many people don't recognize is actually thermals. So I've done a lot of research on thermals for laptops. We have a lot of users that come in and tells us that if something's too hot, they feel worried that it's unsafe to use or simply can burn them. And, you know, things like that is often overlooked as just an engineering problem, but we work with engineering to actually fix these things. And I know we didn't even talk about it, but it's very relevant to what Monica says, but the instructions also fall under packaging as well. So you'll see that once in a while you come across opening a box of a really cool new tech and you see that it's all laid out perfectly, but once in a while you open up something else that you'll realize is missing or some of the wires are just hidden. So we try to make our role in industry to delight the user, and small things like that is part of human factors.
Yeah, I actually just thought of something that kind of was a pleasure point for me when using a certain item or using a certain product. So I use Discord, which is, maybe some of you have heard of it. It's a chat service that you can use online, and you can do voice chat and different things like that. However, I found myself actually logging into Discord on multiple different computers sometimes. Maybe if I go to like the computer on campus and I want to use that and I want to log in, a way that I can just do that is I can pull up I could pull up my phone, which I'm logged into Discord, and I just scan the QR code onto the computer I want to log in to Discord, and it will automatically do that for me and just ask my permission. So then I don't have to type in anything, which kind of seems like initially people might think like, oh, that's just being lazy, but it's also reducing my workload. I don't have to remember my username or my password. It's just all on my phone. I just scan it and that's it. So it's, I think it was a great experience.
So Apple has a new feature, which I just learned about. I don't have an iPhone, but I heard about it, where a lot of times if you're trying to log into something, it will send you a security code. So if I'm logging into, say, Facebook on my phone, but I haven't logged in before, it may try to get me to verify my account. So dual authentication, always use it, two-factor dual authentication. But it will send you a text message with a code that you need to type in to show that this is really you trying to access the account. Well, if you're logging in on your phone and it sends the message with the security code to your phone, Apple devices will now automatically recognize the security code in the message. So you don't have to go back and forth between the message you receive and the application or the website you're trying to log into. It'll automatically recognize that you received this message with a security code, and it'll input you and authenticate it for you. So just reducing your cognitive load and the amount of work you need to do.
Yeah, so I don't think we have any questions yet. So I'd like to open up this time for anyone who might want to expand on some of the ideas that they shared earlier that they weren't able to share fully. Anyone want to?
Just going back to see what else I left.
Oh, and Rachel's joined us now, by the way. I just noticed that. So if you do have questions for Rachel, she's here. All right. So I'm trying to think of any other examples that I can give. So let me talk a little bit about, because I know we talked about what you can do with HF, but like, how do you get there? So let me spend a minute to get to that. So typically, if you want to work in an HF field, a human factors field, you need to go to college, and you need to get at least a bachelor's degree. But it's highly recommended to actually go to graduate school to get a master's degree or a PhD. So that's what we are all currently in. We're in a PhD program, which means we go to school for 2 years to get our master's degree and approximately 3 years to get our PhD, but sometimes that can be a little more, a little less, depending. But that's the general process. If we were to get a master's degree, we might make a little bit less money and do a slightly different job than we would if we were to get a PhD. If we get a PhD, we'd be the ones who are designing designing the studies and different things like that. Versus if we're a master's degree, we might typically be the ones who are kind of running it and different things like that. Anybody want to add anything to that?
Each part of the field of human factors is different So depending on what you want to go into, you may not need as much or as high of a degree as you may think. You don't necessarily need the highest of the highest degree in order to do a human factors job. So in some areas of the field, a master's degree is completely sufficient. We've all been internship hunting lately. And so on LinkedIn, there have been a number of positions for bachelor's and master's level candidates who can get internships or even full-time positions. So depending on where in the career field you want to go, typically those in government agencies are going to want you to have a PhD. They're going to want you to have that highest degree, but not all industry positions really require that. So don't feel discouraged thinking that you need to get a PhD. You don't have to. But just depending on where in the field you want to go, it could benefit you. So don't necessarily think that you have to get the highest of the high degree. And even being added to that, because of how diverse human factors is, I know we kind of posed the question of challenge us, see if there's a field you can think of where human factors does not apply. Our program in the beginning, we said is a psychology program, but I have a bachelor's in biology. So even coming into it with a bachelor's in biology, there's a lot of different backgrounds that come into human factors. You can do work in computer science. There are people in engineering who end up with human factors degrees. You could do biology, psychology. There's such a wide range in this field that it's very accessible to anybody.
Speaking to what Monica was saying, I have a bachelor's in economics and psychology, and once I got into grad school, I found that economics and human factors also work really well together, because economics studies how people work in both micro, small business settings, but also macro settings. So just the economy in a country or the world. And so human factors can be applied even in business, like marketing, seeing how people work there. And then related to that, it makes me think of the Netflix documentary about Social Dilemma, because that's talking about how people are provided nudges by social media all the time. And that's even a tool that's been used a lot in advertising and things like that. So yeah, the possibilities are pretty much endless. I think you can find a lot of places where human factors can collaborate with other fields and both of them can inform each other.
Yeah, even within psychology as an undergrad, there's just so many fields. And I'm sure that for the majority of us on this call, if we were not exposed to human factors early on, we probably would have gone into something else. I think the popular one is definitely clinical psychology, social psychology, things like that. And technically, originally for several years in my undergrad, I was specializing in something called IO psychology. And it wasn't until the last minute when I realized that I prefer technology over just doing more HR related work that I, with 3 years worth of research background in IO, decided to last minute apply to human factors. And luckily, a lot of the training we've had in just research methodology and understanding how to do critical thinking still works out. So I wouldn't be worried about what your background is when you're applying to grad school, either a master's or a PhD. You just have to make sure that you can emphasize, you can do some of the most basic thing, which is applying basic research methodologies, techniques. So I think, did we talk about how to get into grad school? Like one of the main things that I think kids at that age, I feel like I didn't realize that you needed to get letters of recommendations and also do some research lab. I've always thought that when I was in high school, all you had to do was just get good grades and then you can just apply to grad school. But there's many more steps into that. And asking around at the professors definitely help. So anyone want to give their personal experience with that? Ladies?
Rachel, you are the most recent to go through that.
You're right. Okay, so I guess the first thing that I would say is research is so important. I was able to do research, I think it was like my senior year of high school. And then in college, I did research for my sophomore year up until the end. And I guess one thing that I would add is that I did not really hear about HF until honestly the end of my junior year, which really gave me like a solid couple of months to figure out, how I would turn all of my previous like research with like HR and like IO into HF. And so I would probably just say to just learn about like all of the things that you think that you might want to work on early, because that will help you like that will help you at the end.
Yeah, I mean, just like what Rachel was saying, so many of these basic principles is all tied to human behavior, and decision making plays a big, big part in our field, but in every field, really. So, I mean, I think what Monica is doing right now, same with Jasmine, Shivani, Abbie, Rachel, it all has to center around decision making, even if it's not called that in whatever subfield we're in.
I don't know, that is my subfield.
No,
No,
well, I'll just say within
Yeah.
subfield in psychology or human factors, there's just many things in that.
I mean, I wish that I'd known what human factors was sooner, which is why I'm really glad that we try to do these outreaches, because even expanding similar to what Rachel said, I didn't learn about it till the end of my junior year of college.
Same.
I Googled careers in psychology and it came up, and I realized that so many things that I'd done in my daily life or in the research that I was doing applied to human factors, that I was incorporating those principles without even realizing they had that name.
Yeah, I would just follow that up with, again, we ask the question, try and challenge us to something that doesn't have HF, because literally everything has HF. And just like even your trash can, like look at your trash can. How do you know how to open it? Like some thought was put into that to some HF design was put into that to think like what are the indicators of how to open this trash can? Or one of my favorite examples is doors. So you probably can think of an example where you didn't know how to open a door, like you to push it or pull it, or what do I need to do? And to try to avoid that confusion, people can make handles look different. So if you look at a handle, is it a push or pull handle? So you can think that way, or you can even see like labeling. Somebody might just label it and say push or pull, but sometimes the labels are wrong. So yeah, there's HF in everything that we do, and it's amazing what you can do with this career, with this degree.
Definitely, it's very diverse. While I focus my research on or I'm trying to focus my research now on race cars, and I work with motorcycles, I don't feel cornered into doing just that, because the principles that I learn about usability, about environmental design, about how to make things more accessible to people, I don't feel cornered in my one little silo of research. I feel like I can actually have a conversation and really think outside of the box about so many different parts of the field.
One thing I want to mention too, and if anybody wants to add to this, is that ergonomics is a really big part of human factors as well. So we have the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society. So our society, like our journal that we submit to most of the time, is combined with ergonomics. So we really work hand in hand with like kind of understanding the body and different things like that in order to design things. So for example, I think one of the coolest examples of this is for spacesuits. When they were designing spacesuits, they had to use ergonomics measurements and different things like that to know what would be the best, standard issue spacesuit to create for people to have access to, and also the design of the ship, right? What size do people have to be to fit in there, or to design the ship that would fit the most people? So yeah, anybody else have anything to add about ergonomics?
I mean, for some of the military research that we've done in the past with General Atomics, we had to design certain sticks for them to maneuver some of the targets on the interface a little bit better and also more comfortable. And we were also in charge of designing the seats as well. And you can only take so many user feedback with that, because there's a couple jokes in there where the pilots really wanted a cup holder, but it's not very integral to their mission. And so it's fun to talk to these subject matter experts sometimes to develop the best product for their use case. There's some specialized products that is just not for the general public, and it does require some knowledge in how to handle these things. So something like the interfaces that you see in the F1 Formula cars, where typical drivers are not going to encounter every day. But for them as subject matter experts, we want to tailor the experience to them, make sure things are comfortable and easy to understand. So does anyone else would like to talk about maybe industry? I think everyone here has had an opportunity to go and talk about that. So Jasmine, do you want to start?
Sure. So I worked with a lot of different companies within when I was working in the consulting company. So I've worked from anywhere from software to hardware to developing training materials. So that's what I did over at NASA. I developed display training material that would basically that the astronauts would look at, that the people who are when they're running user tests and they're running a interface through testing, they would provide that training to them, and they would provide the training also to the people that are on the ground as well. So UX or human factors just involves so much training, like teaching, just everything. And even though that kind of training idea isn't, I wouldn't say necessarily industry, I was working for government at that point, it's still like those skills can be applied to anything really. I also, if anybody wants to add on to that, but I also noticed Jill has a question for us in the chat. So if anybody wants to also address that.
So I have an interesting example here that's quite relevant to some of the predicament that we're in under the pandemic. So it's funny that you mentioned mobile applications. It's true that for many years that we have been gearing towards using mostly our mobile phones to achieve a lot of the tasks that we have to do. And that also includes some of the employees that we work with, and they are our users. So I am currently in charge of doing a lot of research for our corporate intranet, and the intranet is really basically just a company intranet that only employees can use. And they have been gearing towards most of the applications on the mobile phone prior to the pandemic. But what happened was, once the pandemic shifted and we're all work from home, we noticed a drastic drop on mobile interfaces, and most people are just using their computer UIs. And so with that has done in our industry is we actually have shifted some funding to focus more on improving the interfaces for our computer applications rather than applying it onto the mobile devices. So that's kind of how we've seen the trend has been going. And maybe or maybe not, that's not the case. That could be improved on later on. But for now, that's kind of what I'm seeing in the field I'm working in.
Just adding on to that is there's two things to think about now, right? So when deciding a website or something like that, it's not going to appear or it's not going to be the same thing as it is on your mobile phone. So you've probably used like Facebook, for example. Facebook looks a lot different on the computer compared to the mobile phone. So just like Christina was saying, different things can shift when people use those different applications, and we can do different research to see, okay, when somebody is on Facebook on their phone, what are they most doing, right? Maybe they want access. So for example, you can take a picture right on Facebook and post it right away. That's something you can't do on the PC version, the computer version. So it's just different things like that you have to consider when designing different things. Absolutely. Anybody else have any comments, questions? We can end a little early if we want, but if anybody else has, any things to talk about.
I mean, the last thing I can kind of point out is we're very lucky and fortunate that in our industry, we get to work with a wide range of other experts. So we're not just tied to just psychology, academics itself. We're working with engineering, we're working with software developers, we're working with product designers, we're working with project managers, even especially marketing too. And it's important for us to realize that we're all kind of cohesive as we're trying to get one good product to the user out. We're not working in silos, or we try not to. Like a good product will incorporate all of us together. And some industry doesn't always apply that, but we're trying to get more buy-in as we go on and hopefully make things safer and easier to use in our everyday lives.
I would definitely say that the biggest thing right now is just spreading the word that human factors exists. That's one thing that, at least during the student portion of our human factors conference that we had this year, it was a question that was asked. It was, people ask what I do. I tell them I work in human factors and ergonomics, and they ask me, what is that? Because nobody's heard of it. And so I think right now the biggest thing is spreading awareness that human factors exists, and it's very applicable to your everyday life, and just being aware and paying attention to how it applies around you. I think that that's definitely the biggest thing right now, so that we can now develop products that are going to be better for the majority of users, so that we don't have to design something and then redesign it so that it works for someone else. That universal design that Jasmine was talking about.
Yeah, getting our input early on certainly helps. Otherwise, we're just working backwards. And with the reality of how money is funded into these products, we don't want to duplicate our efforts. So guys, Human Factors is here to stay, and let's try to spread the word.
I will also make a note too that I know many people worry, well, what about the job outcome? Like, am I actually going to find a job, after I graduate with a career? Absolutely. There are so many, even during the pandemic, there are so many application or job applications out there, job postings out there. And you get paid for the work that you do. You get paid a good amount, also depending on where you work, but the pay can be anywhere from 50K to like 130K a year, just depending on where you live. But it's definitely a good amount of money that you can get paid, and it's something that you will find a career in. So
especially
yeah.
as companies are now becoming more aware of human factors and the importance of it.
Mm-hmm.
They're definitely realizing that it's a department where they need to put that effort into, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's growing very much so. I actually think in the last 10 years or something, every graduated student from our program has found a job in human factors, whether they wanted to go into academia or government research or industry. No matter what they wanted to do, they found a job within about 6 months of graduating.
Mm-hmm.
And even sooner. I think the longest was actually 6 months. So it's a very open field right now.
Shivani, can you go to the next slide? And if anybody else wants to talk after that, go ahead. I just wanted to share our contact information if you had any questions for any of us. And it doesn't even have to be about human factors. It could be about graduate school in general. If you have a question about applying. Yeah, so we all currently go to Wichita State University, but we have been to other universities as well in undergraduate. So we're happy to talk. Our graduate school and undergraduate school as well. We're happy to talk about either. Any other comments that we want to make before we close up?
The last one I have is just saying thank you to everybody who's been able to tune in and to even take the first step of being interested early on and asking questions and even putting yourself out there to learn about STEM. That's huge in and of itself. So thank you guys and all you ladies who are tuning in to watch this.
Actually, one last comment is, so in psychology, we're very much dominated by females, but once you enter into human factors, majority of the people I do work with is male throughout my career. So I always want to encourage more females into the STEM work, just because it's nice to see other people that we can relate to. So good job, guys.
I actually want to say something on that too. It might seem like maybe I hope this is the case, that you have seen women in positions and jobs that you want to do in the future. But for a lot of girls, we haven't had the opportunity to see that. So we're here, to help you we want to see you succeed, and most other people do. Most other women want you to succeed as well. We want to see women doing their best and being successful. So on that note, absolutely reach out to people, and I'm saying this wholeheartedly. Reach out to other people. The worst thing that can happen is they don't respond. So send an email, send a connection on LinkedIn, reach out to a speaker that might have come to your school. Reach out to them, because the worst thing they can do is say no, but the best thing they can do is recognize you, remember your name, and then in the future, when you're looking to apply to jobs, or you grow your community. So I would say that was my number one advice for no matter what your field you're going into. Make connections, reach out, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Right. All right. I don't think anybody else has any other comments, so we're going to go ahead and end there. Again, feel free to reach out to any of us, and we were really excited to put this on and present to everyone. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.